I remember the way that morning felt on my skin, thin and cold, like the kind of day that decides your life is about to split into a before and an after. If you're here with me now, I hope you'll stay until the end. Maybe by the time I finish, you'll understand why I'm no longer the same woman I used to be. I hadn't planned anything special. No grand gesture, no hidden suspicions, no warning that my world was about to tilt. I simply woke up, baked an apple pie, Claire's favorite, and thought it would be nice to surprise my daughter-in-law. I'd always been the kind of woman who did small, kind things without thinking twice. Kindness felt safe, familiar, maybe even expected. Her street was quiet as I pulled in, the sun pale and uninterested, stretching its light across the rows of tidy houses. Claire's place looked picture perfect, as it always did: white fence, flower pots, a neat little porch swing. It should have made me smile. Instead, something inside me tightened, a strange flutter of unease that I couldn't explain. Then I saw it. Parked right beside her steps, gleaming in the dull morning light, was Frank's silver SUV, my husband's car. For a moment I didn't react. My eyes focused, unfocused, then focused again, as if blinking long enough would make it disappear. Frank never visited Claire, never mentioned stopping by, never hinted at anything that would put him here, in her driveway, at this hour. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, pulse slowing instead of speeding up, the way it sometimes does when your mind refuses to understand what your eyes already know. Maybe he borrowed it to someone, maybe he'd dropped something off, maybe God, maybe anything else. But the longer I stared, the colder I felt. Eventually I got out, moving slowly, quietly, like my body knew not to disturb whatever truth was lurking behind those walls. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes, too loud, too sharp. I held my breath as I approached the side of the house, the pie still warm in my hands. I didn't expect to hear anything, but then, laughter. Two voices, soft, intimate, floating through the cracked kitchen window, the one near her breakfast table. Claire's voice came first, playful in a way she never used with me. "You're late." A faint hum of teasing complaint, followed by a low chuckle I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Frank." I froze, my feet rooted to the ground, my breath pulled tight against my ribs. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Something inside me whispered, "Turn around, please. Just turn around," but I didn't. I stepped closer instead, like each quiet movement belonged to someone else wearing my skin. Then I heard him. Clearer this time, familiar, intimate. "Don't start, Claire. You know how careful we have to be." And then the sentence that carved a hole straight through the center of my chest. "If your son ever finds out, we're done." Your son? My son. The pie slipped from my fingers before I even felt it leave my hands. It hit the ground in a soft, final thud. Apples, crust, cinnamon scattering across the driveway, like pieces of something I couldn't glue back together. The world tilted, my ears filled with a dull, roaring sound, like a distant storm collapsing. I stepped back, once, twice, unable to steady my breath. My hands shook so violently I could barely grab my keys. Inside the house, chairs scraped, more laughter. That same warm, unguarded tone he'd never used with me anymore. And then Claire's voice, light as a needle. "She'll never suspect. She trusts both of us. Both of us." I don't remember the drive home. Not a second of it. Hours later, I found myself sitting in my kitchen, coat still on, hands sticky with syrup from the ruined pie. The clock ticked. The coffee burned on the stove. Family photos stared at me from the wall, smiling faces, celebrations, holidays, lies. At midnight, the front door opened. Frank walked in, kissed my forehead, and smelled like gardenia and smoke her perfume. He smiled, gentle, tired, the way he used to when he wanted me to worry about him. "You okay?" he asked softly. That was the moment it hit me. Not the affair, not the betrayal, not even the cruelty of it. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't afraid. He didn't even think he'd be caught. "I'm fine," I managed, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding hard enough to crack my ribs. He nodded, poured himself a drink, turned on the TV, and acted like it was any other night. But I knew better. Later, lying beside him, listening to his careless breathing, I stared at the ceiling awake, hollow, cold, and somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet promise forming in the dark. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but they would both regret underestimating me. The morning after hearing their voices through that window, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place I had once lived in, years ago, before life hollowed itself out and left only echoes behind. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I couldn't taste, watching the steam rise and fade into nothing, just like the version of myself I'd been the day before. Frank had left early for meetings. I watched his silver SUV roll down the driveway, the same one I'd seen outside Claire's house. The moment it disappeared from view, a strange pressure in my chest loosened, but only enough for me to breathe, not enough to feel alive. I sat at the kitchen table, where we'd shared breakfast for 25 years and counted. Not numbers, not minutes, but the lies, the late nights at the office, the business trips, the missed birthdays, the quiet apologies that seemed sweet then but sour now. The way Claire smiled at him during family dinners, too warm, too gentle, too familiar. I counted everything I had given up for him, opportunities, friendships, pieces of myself I couldn't name anymore. And for the first time, the ache behind my eyes didn't turn into tears. It hardened. At one point, my son called. His name lit up the screen, and my hand moved toward the phone before stopping mid-air. I couldn't do it. I couldn't shatter his world with mine, not yet. So I let it ring until the sound died. Later, I walked through the house, touching things not to feel them, but to remind myself they were real. The picture frames, the worn-out curtains, the books with creases from nights Frank used to read beside me. All of it felt like props from a life I had been performing instead of living. And when I reached our bedroom, our unmade bed, his pillow dented from sleep, something inside me finally broke, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't tears or screaming or collapsing onto the floor. It was something smaller, quieter, sharper. Resolve. Frank had built his world on my trust. Claire had built hers on my kindness. And both of them had mistaken my silence for weakness. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a blank notebook. Its whiteness stared back at me, waiting. My hand trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. And then I started writing. Not a letter, not a confession. A plan. The first lines were simple, clean. Bank accounts, property deeds, business assets. What belonged to him? What belonged to me? What I could take back. Every word steadied me. Every item I wrote felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. I was planning survival. That evening, I booked an appointment with a lawyer. 2 days later, I walked into Michael's office, old building, creaking floors, the faint smell of wood polish. I sat in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine I didn't read, my pulse heavy but slow. When he called my name, I felt like someone walking toward her own verdict. Michael was calm, patient, the kind of man who knew people came to him when they were breaking. I told him my story, but not all of it. The betrayal, yes. The years of distance, yes. The coldness growing in my marriage, yes. But not Claire, not yet. The wound was too fresh to say out loud. I want a divorce, I said softly. Is there someone else? He asked. The question sliced through me. I nodded. Yes. He didn't pry. He simply began listing what I needed to know: property rights, financial documents, legal protections. His words were crisp, practical, and each one twisted a knife deeper into a truth I had never questioned. I had no idea how our finances worked. Frank had handled everything, every bill, every investment, every account. My trust, once so natural, now felt like another betrayal. Michael asked for bank statements, tax returns, business documents. I promised I'd get them, but on the drive home, a wave of fear swept over me. What if Frank had already hidden everything? What if he'd moved the money? What if he'd planned this long before I discovered it? For a moment, I almost turned the car around, ready to give up before the fight even started. But then something steadier rose inside me, defiance, the kind that comes when you've already lost too much to lose anything else. That night, after Frank fell asleep, I walked to his study. The door was locked, as always. He said it was just work, but the door had always felt like a barrier between us. I reached behind the hallway frame and pulled out the spare key he didn't know I kept. It slid into the lock smoothly, almost mockingly. Inside, the air smelled like whiskey and old cologne. His desk was spotless, too spotless. I turned on the lamp and began searching. Folders, contracts, receipts, emails. I didn't even know what I was looking for, until I found it. A printed email thread. At first glance, business-related, professional, nothing alarming. But then one line caught my eye. A sentence that froze the blood in my veins. The transfer needs to go through by the end of the quarter, or your husband will notice. Your husband. My son. My heart stopped. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just betrayal. They were moving money. My son's money. Behind his back, the room tilted. The lamp flickered. My hands clenched the paper so tight the edges tore. And in that moment, standing alone in the dim light of Frank's study, fear didn't swallow me. Purpose did. For the next few days, my life moved with a strange, deliberate calm, like I was floating above myself, watching a woman I used to know transform into someone sharper, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even confront Frank. Instead, I focused on one thing, gathering the truth, piece by piece, until the whole rotten structure he built finally collapsed under its own weight. Every night, after Frank drifted off to sleep with the same careless snore I'd heard for decades, I slipped out of bed and returned to his study. I photographed documents, screenshotted emails, copied bank slips, stored everything neatly on a hidden drive Michael told me to create. And while he slept peacefully, I sat in the cold glow of my phone, watching the puzzle of their lies assemble itself with terrifying clarity. The strangest part? The more I discovered, the calmer I became. Pain had a way of burning itself out. Focus replaced it. A week later, Michael called. "Mrs. Walker," he said, "I reviewed the documents you sent. There's a possibility your husband has been using the company to move personal assets. If we prove that, you'll be entitled to a substantially larger settlement." I thanked him, but something inside me was already shifting. It wasn't the money. It was the truth, the justice of it, the simple, undeniable fact that they deserved every consequence coming their way. That night, Frank noticed. We were eating dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal I'd made 1,000 times. He looked at me for longer than usual. Fork paused midair, like he was examining a stranger. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Everything okay?" I smiled, just enough to unsettle him. "The longest day," I answered softly. He chuckled, pretending not to hear the double meaning. But I saw it, the flicker of suspicion behind his eyes. He sensed something, and when men like Frank sense danger, they don't change their behavior, they change their tactics. The next morning, he left his phone on the counter while stepping outside to take a call. My eyes flicked toward the screen without meaning to, and saw a preview of a message. "Be careful. She's acting strange. Claire." He deleted it when he came back in, smiling too easily, drinking his coffee too slowly, trying to appear relaxed, pretending, always pretending. Fine, let him pretend. I had become very, very good at pretending too. The following day, I walked into Michael's office with a folder thick enough to break a spine. Emails, photos, receipts, transfers. A timeline of betrayal so clear, even Frank couldn't talk his way around it. Michael flipped through it with growing respect. "You've done your homework," he said. "You have no idea," I replied, and I meant it. 2 mornings later, I filed for divorce. The courthouse was gray, cold, the kind of place where truths go to be made official. My pulse was steady as I handed the papers over. For me, it wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the declaration of a war I was finally prepared to win. By the time I drove home, Frank's SUV was already in the driveway. He was standing on the porch, jaw tight, phone in hand. He'd gotten the call from his lawyer. "So it's true," he said the moment I stepped out of the car. "No conversation? No explanation? You just filed?" I met his eyes without flinching. "Yes." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "After all these years, Marilyn, you couldn't talk to me first?" "After all these years," I said quietly. "You think I'd still want to talk?" His face twitched, not with guilt, not with fear, with irritation, like my pain was an inconvenience. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're getting into." "Oh," I replied. "I think I do." We stared at each other for a long, tense moment. Then his tone softened into something patronizing and painfully familiar. "Look, if this is about Claire, don't," I whispered. "Don't say her name to me." He stopped, shrugged, looked away like she meant nothing to him. "Fine. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow. We'll keep this clean. No need to make it ugly. But there was fear there now. A small crack, but a crack nonetheless. That night, he didn't come home. The next day, my phone rang again and again. Claire. I ignored her first 2 calls. On the third, I answered. Marilyn, she said, voice trembling, too soft. Please, can we talk? There's nothing to talk about. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You betrayed my son. You betrayed me. That's all I need to know. I hung up. She called again. I blocked her. An hour later, a text from Frank lit up my screen. You're making this worse for everyone. Stop before you regret it. Regret. I stared at the word for a long moment. It didn't scare me. Later that night, as I checked my email, a new message appeared. No subject, no signature, just one sentence. If you don't want your son to find out everything, you'll drop the case. My pulse pounded. Not from fear, from fury. They weren't just cheating. They weren't just stealing. They were cornered, panicking, and cornered animals always bite. But they had forgotten one thing. So do women who stop being afraid. The day after that anonymous threat, the air around the house felt heavier, as if every room was holding its breath for whatever would come next. I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. If anything, their desperation only sharpened something inside me, something steady, calculating, unshakable. But fear works in cycles. It doesn't vanish. It shifts. That night, I slept lightly, every creak of the floorboards sounding like footsteps, every passing car making my heart tighten just a little. Yet, instead of weakening me, the fear clarified things. It told me exactly who I was dealing with, and it told me what I needed to do next. 2 nights later, they showed up together. I was in the kitchen when I heard a knock, sharp and too familiar. When I opened the door, Frank stood there in his perfectly pressed suit, shoulders squared like he still believed he held authority in my home. Claire hovered at his side, eyes glossy, lips arranged into an expression that tried and failed to look apologetic. Marilyn, Frank began smoothly. We just want to talk. I'm not interested, I replied. Claire stepped forward, her hands trembling just a little, practiced fragility dripping from her voice. Please, you've misunderstood everything. I never wanted this. Wanted what? I cut in. My husband? My family? Or the money you thought you could siphon without getting caught? Her mask slipped. For 1 second, just one, her eyes flashed something sharp and ugly before she pulled the sweetness back on like a coat. Frank raised his hand. Enough. We're not here to fight. He lowered his voice, glancing toward the street as if afraid the neighbors might hear. You're making this public, Marilyn, and that's not going to end well for anyone, especially you. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the distance between us. Especially me? I said quietly. You think I'm the one who should be afraid here? Something cold flickered in Frank's eyes. A threat. The kind he never used to bother hiding. You've lived off my money for decades, he said. You won't survive this on your own. I almost smiled. It was small, almost gentle. Watch me. The silence that followed stretched tight, buzzing with everything they wanted to say and couldn't. Claire tugged on his arm. Let's go, she whispered. She's not worth it. They turned and left. But as Claire walked down the driveway, she cast one last glance over her shoulder, a sharp, venomous glare that said exactly what her words didn't. They'd be back. That night, I barely slept, but not because of fear, because of clarity. They had tried to intimidate me. Instead, they revealed just how terrified they were. In the morning, I called Michael. We move forward, I told him. No delays. He didn't question me. He understood the tone of a woman who has stopped asking for permission. The next few days brought a new tactic from them. Sweetness wrapped in poison. A bouquet of white lilies and red roses appeared on my doorstep no card. Too perfect. Too calculated. Then came the text. We just want to make peace. No lawyers. Just talk. I didn't respond. 2 days later, they rang the doorbell again. This time, I didn't open it. I watched through the curtain as Frank smiled up at the doorbell camera, pretending for the neighbors that everything was fine. Claire stood beside him, sunglasses hiding her expression, shoulders stiff. After a moment, Frank spoke loudly enough for the microphone to capture the performance. We're just trying to make peace, Marilyn. We don't want this to get ugly. Ugly. I wondered if he even heard himself. When they left, I replayed the footage twice, not to analyze their words, but to watch Claire's subtle glances, the way she looked at the camera, the way she clenched her jaw, calculating, angry, cornered. That evening, my phone rang again, an unknown number this time. I almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct told me to answer. "Mrs. Walker," a calm male voice said. "This is Detective Hayes. We received a report claiming you've been harassing your daughter-in-law." For a second, the room spun. "What?" I whispered. "The complaint came through an anonymous call," he continued. "We're required to follow up." Anonymous. Of course. They'd tried emotional manipulation. They'd tried intimidation. Now they were trying to build a case that I was unstable. I took a breath, steady and cold. "Detective, you're welcome to speak with my attorney," I said. After the call, I sat for a long moment, letting fury settle in my bones, not wild, not frantic, but clean and precise. They wanted me to look hysterical. They wanted evidence I was losing control. So I gave them nothing. That night, I drove to Elaine's house. Elaine had once been my closest friend, college roommate, maid of honor. Life had thinned our connection but never severed it. When she opened the door, she looked at me for a long time before pulling me into a hug. In her kitchen, over a pot of tea that smelled faintly of cinnamon, I told her everything. The affair, the lies, the money, the threats. Every word poured out as if I had been holding them in my lungs for months. Elaine listened with quiet strength. No interruptions, no pity. Her hand rested on mine as I spoke. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You know, I went through the same thing." I stared at her. "What?" "My husband, 5 years ago." She gave a small, sad smile. "I thought I'd die, Marilyn, but I didn't. I rebuilt, slowly, quietly. And I'm better now." "How?" I whispered. She took a breath. "By realizing that the worst thing had already happened. Once you lose everything you were terrified to lose, you're finally free." Her words settled into me like warm water sinking into cold stone. She invited me to a small women's group she ran on Saturdays, a circle of women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, abandonment, or loss. I went the next week. We sat in her backyard on mismatched chairs, sunlight filtering through old oak branches. There were no therapists, no formal rules, just women, real women, with real scars. Some had been cheated on, others left behind, others forgotten by men who promised forever. No bitterness, just honesty. For the first few sessions, I didn't speak. I listened. And every story, every shared breath, every fragile laugh made me feel a little less alone. Then one afternoon, Elaine looked at me and asked softly, "Marilyn, what do you want now? Not what you've lost. What do you want?" The question felt like someone had placed a mirror in front of my soul. What did I want? I looked around at the women, at Elaine, at the faint sunlight trembling on the table. I said slowly, "to stop being someone they can hurt." The group fell silent, then nodded softly, knowingly. Elaine smiled. "That," she said, "is a start." And for the first time since the day I stood beneath Claire's window, I felt something like oxygen fill my lungs. I was no longer just surviving them. I was becoming someone they should have feared from the start. The Monday before the hearing, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not because it needed it, but because I needed a place where something, anything, still made sense. Every sweep of the cloth, every neatly stacked paper, every scrubbed corner was a way of reminding myself that not everything in my life was chaos. Some things could still be put in order. But the truth is, the courthouse was all I could think about. For weeks, everything had been building toward that room, that judge, that moment when all the shadows Frank and Claire had been hiding in would finally be dragged into the light. I didn't know whether I would win. I didn't know what would happen. But I knew one thing for certain. I was ready. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. My body moved on autopilot: coffee, shower, dress, papers in my bag. No panic, no shaking hands, just a cold, steady focus that frightened me with how calm it felt. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving. A few new lines. Eyes older than I remembered. But there was something else too. A sharpness. A quiet certainty. At the courthouse steps, Michael met me with a nod and a steady, reassuring look. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said. And for the first time since the day at Claire's window, I meant it. Inside, the hearing room was colder than I expected, fluorescent lights humming softly overhead. Frank was already there, immaculate suit, expensive watch, the polished charm of a man who believed consequences were for other people. Claire sat beside him, dressed perfectly, makeup flawless. But her hands, hidden in her lap, trembled. I saw it. So did Frank. When she noticed me, she gave a small, polite smile, the same one she used to give me across the family dinner table. The same smile she used while sleeping with my husband. I didn't return it. The judge began with the basics: marital assets, property, accounts, routine words, until Michael stood. "Your Honor," he said, "we would like to introduce additional evidence." Frank's jaw twitched. Michael placed a thick folder on the table. Bank statements indicating irregular transfers from the joint business account into a private account controlled by Mrs. Walker's daughter-in-law, Claire Henderson. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Claire's hand shot to her mouth. "That's a lie," she whispered. The judge lifted a hand. "You'll have your turn, Miss Henderson." Michael continued calmly, each word precise and controlled. "We also have email correspondence between Mr. Walker and Miss Henderson, indicating a coordinated effort to conceal these transfers." Now the room fell silent, the type of silence that crushes the air. Frank tried speaking first, voice smooth but strained. "This is ridiculous. My wife is confused. She's been under stress." I stood. "Under stress?" I said, my voice steady, cutting clean through his. "Yes, Frank. The kind caused by watching my husband sleep with my son's wife and steal from his own child." The judge called for order, but I barely heard him. Frank's mask cracked. Claire turned toward him, whispering furiously, her voice no longer sweet or composed. "I told you this would happen. You said she'd never find out." Frank hissed. "Quiet. You're making it worse." "Oh, I'm making it worse?" she shot back, voice rising. "You're the one who told me to move the money." Gavel. Enough. But the damage was already done. Every word they spilled was another stone sinking their ship. Michael leaned toward me and whispered, "That's all we needed." For the rest of the hearing, they stumbled. Frank tried charm, denial, anger, nothing stuck. Claire cried, accused, blamed, nothing worked. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was loud enough for all of us. When the judge adjourned, his tone made it clear. He'd seen everything he needed to. Outside, the winter air felt sharp against my skin. Frank caught up to me, his face pale, jaw clenched tight. "You think this is over?" he said quietly. "You've humiliated me. You've humiliated yourself. Our son will hate you for this." I turned to him, my voice low and steady. "No, Frank. He'll hate you for making me do it." For a moment, he looked like he might hit me. Then he laughed a short, broken sound. "You've always been colder than you pretend," he said. I met his gaze. "You taught me." He stormed toward the parking lot, where Claire waited in their old sedan far from the shiny SUV they once flaunted. Her mascara streaked, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. I watched them drive off, their silhouettes shrinking in the distance, swallowed by the gray morning. I felt, not triumph, not joy, not even relief, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when you're not sure what's still standing, but you know you're still here. Michael walked out beside me. "You did well," he said. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "They did." The fallout came fast. Headlines, whispers, neighbors avoiding their house, the company's announcement of Frank's resignation, Claire's name scrubbed from every document, their friends disappearing like smoke. Every consequence they had outrun for years, finally catching up. One afternoon at the grocery store, I saw them across the parking lot, Frank thinner, grayer, Claire hollow-eyed, sunglasses, hiding nothing. They were arguing sharply beside an old rusted car. Frank looked up and saw me. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then he looked away. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just finality. That night, I boxed up the last of his belongings and left them by the curb. The garbage truck came the next morning and took it all away. The house felt bigger, lighter, almost unfamiliar without the weight of him in it. My son called again days later. "This time," I answered. He didn't ask for explanations. He didn't need to. The world had already told him enough. "Mom," he said softly. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," I replied. "Just live your life better than we did." Long pause. Then, almost a whisper, "I will." We never talked about it again. Weeks passed. The world moved on. Their scandal faded. But for them, the consequences kept growing teeth. And for me, for the first time in a long, long time, I began to feel something unfamiliar, Something small, fragile, and warm. Hope. A year passed. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime. Sometimes like the echo of a single, long, painful day. The woman who once stood frozen beneath Claire's kitchen window, the one with shaking hands and a heart collapsing inside her chest, was gone. She had vanished slowly, day by day, replaced by someone quieter, steadier, and finally free. I sold the old house. Too many memories lived in those walls. Too many ghosts. Too much air that still carried the scent of betrayal. I used the settlement more generous than I ever expected to buy a small cottage by the ocean. Nothing extravagant. Just enough space for me, a little garden, and a desk by a window that overlooked the gray, restless water. The ocean became my companion, its moods, its tides, its endless hunger. Every morning, it reminded me that life moves forward, whether we want it to or not. I built routines: coffee at sunrise, writing in the afternoons, a walk along the beach at dusk, letting the wind cut through the remnants of the woman I used to be. It was Elaine who convinced me to start a small cooking blog. I named it The Quiet Table. It began with recipes, simple things, soups, breads, pies I no longer made for anyone but myself. But somehow, it became something else. A place where I wrote about healing without naming it, about rebuilding without admitting it, about learning to breathe in a world that had once tried to crush me. People started reading, then commenting, then writing to me, women I'd never meet, sharing their stories, their heartbreaks, their small victories. I never once wrote about Frank or Claire. I didn't need to. Silence, it turns out, can be louder than any confession. News of Frank and Claire reached me the same way the tide reaches the shore, slowly, inevitably, without my asking for it. Frank lived alone now, in a small rented apartment downtown. His business was gone, his savings drained by legal fees, his health failing. A neighbor mentioned he'd had a heart attack. No one visited him in the hospital. Claire didn't stay. Of course she didn't. Last I heard, she drifted from place to place: Chicago, then somewhere in Indiana. Rumors followed her like a shadow. An affair, debts she couldn't pay, a string of jobs that never lasted. Someone said she'd been seen at a roadside motel, sitting on a curb, talking to herself. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't wish her well. I wished her nothing. And nothing is the deepest kind of absence. Some nights, when I sat by the window writing, I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who baked a pie out of kindness, who believed trust was enough to keep a family together. I pitied her, but I loved her, too. She had to exist so I could become this version of myself. One evening, after a storm, I walked along the beach at low tide. The sky was bruised with shades of violet and fading gold. The waves stretched themselves thin across the sand, retreating, returning, retreating again, like the ocean was practicing the art of letting go. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the last thing I still owned from the old house, a small silver key. It was the key to Frank's study, the door he always kept locked, the room where I first discovered the truth, the space where the old version of my life cracked and began to bleed. I turned it in my palm once, then I threw it into the sea. It disappeared instantly. No splash loud enough to matter, no echo, just gone. And with it, something in me finally loosened. That night, I wrote my final entry for The Quiet Table. A day will come when you realize you no longer need to forgive the people who hurt you. You won't hate them. You won't love them. You'll simply stop thinking about them. And that is real freedom, not revenge, not justice, just absence. A life no longer shaped by those who tried to break it. The post went viral. I didn't read the comments. It wasn't written for the world. It was written for me. Winter arrived again. The waves grew wilder. Nights lengthened. The cottage creaked under the wind, like an old ship surviving a long journey. I'd sit by the fire with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, listening to the storm outside. And for the first time in my life, silence didn't frighten me. It felt earned. It felt like mine. Sometimes Elaine visited. We drank tea, talked about nothing, laughed about everything. She told me once, "You look younger now." Maybe I am, I said. And maybe it was true, not in years, but somewhere deeper, somewhere inside the place where broken things learn to reshape themselves. One morning, I stood outside watching gulls circle above the gray water. Cold wind brushed my cheeks, and for the first time in months, I felt something burst quietly inside me. Happiness, not loud, not dramatic, not the kind of happiness you chase, but the kind that settles into your bones like warmth after winter. I whispered to the wind, "You thought you broke me." Then, softer, almost a prayer, "But you can't break what finally became whole." The ocean roared back, endless and forgiving. Frank and Claire were gone now, not dead, not punished, just gone, drowned by their own choices, swallowed by the consequences they thought they were too clever to face. But I had escaped. I had survived. And more importantly, I had outlived them. As the sun rose over the water, spilling gold across the horizon, I felt its warmth on my face. It was the same sun that once witnessed my life fall apart. Now it was witnessing me begin again. I turned, walked back into my little cottage, and closed the door gently behind me. The tide kept rolling in, and I never looked back.